Chapter 1, Change Gon' Come. While contemplating how to start the introduction to this book, I remembered a conversation I had with one of my best friends over coffee while she was visiting me in Pittsburgh. She asked, "How would you describe the significance of this project to your grandmother?" My answer, "This book is about radical politics and revolutionary performance by high school and college students of color involved in a grassroots educational movement designed to confront the structural and performative manifestations of racism in the competitive academic policy debate community." My friend knows my family history. My grandparents were active during the civil rights movement in Tennessee. My earliest memories are of lying on the floor and drawing on copy paper in our local NAACP office, while my grandparents and then my aunts attended meetings. There are pictures in our family photo album of myself as a small child in the early 1980s, at various civil rights demonstrations, confrontations, sponsored by the local National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. One of my favorite old photos is from an NAACP protest of a major Klan rally in Mississippi. I am standing alone on a dusty dirt road in the summer sun, facing the camera, dressed in a pretty red and white dress, hair neat in pigtails and ribbons, white bobby socks and black Mary Janes. It is clear from the photo that I am not paying very much attention to what is going on around me. I seem more interested in digging holes in the dirt with the toe of my dress shoes. Fewer than 10 feet away from the lone figure of the little black girl stands a group of white men dressed in full Klan regalia, hoods and all, looking off camera in the opposite direction of the little girl. For me, the photo evokes a number of conflicting emotions: nostalgia for childhood, fear and trauma attached to the Middle Passage, chattel slavery, and Jim Crow, a burning desire to respond to the contemporary forms of racial oppression. This desire was nurtured and developed from early training in civil rights activism and my early exposure to African American history and white America. It is from this same tradition of an educational commitment to social justice instilled in a small child by her grandparents that highlights the path that led to the writing of this book. My friend's question still resonates with me. How do I describe my project to a woman who put her body on the line in the fight for racial equality, who survived, along with her husband and children, a Klan bombing of her home, a woman who has taught me to be committed to education and active confrontation with the forces of oppression? I would say, Grandma, I am the coach of a movement. That's my favorite part of the book, I think. And I think that it's an excellent example for you of how to use personal experience to begin thinking about and talking about the sort of academic or theoretical work that you're doing in debate rounds itself. And so rather than starting with the theory in this book, I start with the personal story, a way for me to, in many ways, connect with the reader or the audience of people that I don't know, so that they feel connected with me as I tell this story, which is really your story. The second part I want to talk about features Daryl, and Daryl is really good at talking about everybody else and not very good at talking about himself. And so I think that it's important for you all to sort of know a bit about his history and how significant and important he was in the very development of this argument style. And it's without Daryl, we would not be where we are today in talking about these arguments. We would not be having this institute. We would not have national champions who are making this argument. He is the, forefather of the thought that produced this style of argumentation. So, let's see. All right, so I'm going to start with a section out of Chapter 3, which is on the Louisville Project, called The Road to Success. Louisville takes the debate community by storm. The development of the Louisville method and the team's rise to the heights of competitive success did not come without internal conflict. Initially, Daryl and Liz, Elizabeth Jones, who's from the original Louisville team, found themselves engaged in contentious interaction with one another. It was during Liz's senior year that Daryl became an official coach for the team and began to travel with them to tournaments on a consistent basis. Before then, Daryl had traveled with the team to tournaments as a hired judge. Liz remembers that Daryl seemed more interested in hanging out with his friends in debate than spending time with the Louisville debaters. To Liz, Daryl seemed incredibly comfortable in the majority white debate community, unlike the Louisville debaters who felt uncomfortable and ostracized. On the way to the first tournament of the year after Daryl officially joined the staff, Daryl and Liz spent the van ride from Louisville to Atlanta for the Georgia State University debate tournament, sniping at one another. But as they continued to talk about the argument and strategic means of winning over the judging pool, they slowly began to gain an increasing respect for one another. Liz and Tanya's early success during the GSU tournament would help solidify that relationship. Daryl says, It was like 1-0, 2-0, 3-0, 4-0, 5-0, and then at 6-0, Liz was like, okay, I think me and this Birch thing is gonna work out. That was a culminating moment, you know, even though we lost in that next 2 debates to Harvard and then Michigan State, that was a culminating moment, end quote. Liz and Tanya's 6-2 record at GSU would earn them a spot in the double octa finals, representing the top 32 teams based on pre-elimination round records, along with their teammates Corey Knox and RJ Green. Corey and RJ would lose their doubles debate to Northwestern, while Tanya and Liz would win their debate against the University of Redlands. In the next round, they would lose a 2-1 decision to the same Northwestern team that had eliminated Corey and RJ in the previous round. The Louisville team's fine showing at the season opener raised heads and eyebrows across the debate community. The season opener for tournament competition is always a bit difficult. While teams and their coaches can often predict the direction of research on the topic and prepare research in advance of the first tournament, it is their first encounter with certain spins on research and arguments that can be difficult to predict. Teams that might not do well the rest of the year after the newness of their arguments wear off can be quite successful at the season opener. After Louisville's showing at GSU, members of the community might have noticed, but were not yet convinced that they were a team to watch. Thus, when the second big national tournament rolled around in October, held at the University of Kentucky, the pressure was intense for the Louisville team. If they did not follow up their GSU success with a good showing at Kentucky, their earlier success would be considered a fluke. The hyper-political nature of the debate community makes image of success considerably important. Consistent success ensures that a team is recognizable by the top of the judging pool that is most likely to populate the judging panels of late elimination rounds. The more familiar those judges are with the debaters and their beliefs about the debaters' competitive ability can often influence judging decisions in close debates. A failure at Kentucky would be a step backward and would require a great deal more effort to redeem the misstep at the next national tournament. Despite the importance of the tournament to Louisville's success, things began anything but smoothly. First, Dr. Warner put Darryl in charge of filling out the mutual preferred judging sheets for the team. The system of MPJ provides each debate team with a list of judges attending the tournament. Prior to the tournament, each judge must make sure that they have written and uploaded their judging philosophy to a central website so that teams can make well-informed choices about whether or not particular judges will be good for them in competition. Each individual 2-person debate team lists their choices with an ordinal scale that ranks the judges. The tournament tab room, using computer software, matches teams that are scheduled to debate one another with a mutually preferred judge. Given that the Louisville method was engaged in the creation of a revolutionary style of debate that had proven incredibly contentious, it was critically necessary that they be able to identify and rank highly those judges that would be most likely to fairly listen to their argument. Darryl, having just returned to college debate, and MPJ being a fairly new system, did not realize the complicated nature of the judge preference system. He put off completing the preference sheets and Louisville missed the deadline. Even though they eventually complete their preferences, Kentucky refuses to honor them until the second day of competition, which means that all of the Louisville teams for 4 rounds of an 8-round tournament would have to accept whatever judge the other team had preferred, since they had no preferences to set the mutual choice. This was a devastating blow. Darryl said, quote, "So being the person that I was already saying they gonna dog us. You know, they gonna dog us. After the success at Georgia State, they gunning for us at Kentucky. We ain't never done well at Kentucky, so I told Liz and Tanya and Corey and RJ, I apologize ahead of time, the press ain't gonna kick in," end quote. At the end of the first day of competition, Liz and Tanya and Corey and RJ were 1-3. In order to make it to the elimination rounds on the 3rd day, they would need to be undefeated on day 2. Darryl notes that Dr. Warner was livid and insisted that they needed to immediately change the argument for the next day of competition because their current strategy was not working. But Darryl said, "No, Doc, the disaster surrounding the prep sheets was to blame and that the team's preferences would be available for the next day, so they still had a chance." Dr. Warner wasn't convinced, and by the next morning when the team woke up, he had rewritten the entire argument. Darryl overslept that morning and was a little late arriving to the tournament. By the time he made it to the campus, Dr. Warner had the whole team meeting in an empty auditorium classroom on the bottom floor of the main building for the tournament, where he introduced the new argument he wanted them all to run that day. Darryl says, quote, "So by the time I had come in, it was a lot of profanity going back and forth. Liz was in tears, Tanya was in tears, Corey was punching the side of the wall. I was like, oh Lord, what happened? And so I remember Doc said, yo, I'm out. You all do this on your own. You don't want to run my argument, I'm out," end quote. Dr. Warner walked out, but Darryl stayed. He calmed the students and convinced them that all was not lost. They could go on from this point with their regular arguments and win the next 4 debates. Corey and RJ won only 2 of their next debates and were knocked out of contention, but Liz and Tanya won all 4 of their debates. They ended up 5-3 and barely made it into the elimination rounds. They won their first elimination round against Michigan State University and were set to debate Emory University in the octafinals. At the time, the top Emory team was one of the top 3 teams favored to be the best in the country that year. Liz and Tanya were a bit nervous, but Daryl worked to convince them that Emory was beatable because they did not have a good answer to the Louisville argument other than a procedural argument that Louisville's alternative style violated the rules and norms of current debate practice. Liz and Tanya were quite prepared and well practiced at responding to this procedural argument because it was the most commonly used answer to the Louisville style. Before the debate started, Dr. Warner returned. He attempted to convince Liz and Tanya that they should protest the octafinals debate and just walk out. But Liz and Tanya had worked too hard to get into that debate. The snafu with the judging, having to claw their way back to the top after a disastrous first day, and beating MSU, one of the most talented teams in the country, all added to Liz and Tanya's desire to pit themselves against Emory. Louisville lost that debate to Emory with 2 of the 3 judges voting against them. The judge that voted for them stayed for over an hour and a half at the end of the debate to talk to Louisville about their arguments and their discussion of racial exclusion in the debate. The judge was a white male who had not before considered the debate community as an exclusionary space, but after listening to Louisville and taking seriously their criticism of policy debate, he felt it necessary to engage the students about their experiences in debate and the argumentative choice that they had made to disrupt normative debate style and practice. For Daryl, as he watched the students interact with the judge after the debate, he knew that something significant was happening in the community. Despite that loss, Louisville had achieved their goal of continuing their national success. Kentucky, one of the most difficult national debate tournaments, provided a critical space from which to solidify Louisville as a competitive team. But more importantly, it was the beginning of the long road to granting legitimacy to Louisville's new alternative style of debate. I want to pause here to say a little bit about the Kentucky tournament from my own debate history. I began debating at Emory in